1.4 billion Catholics out there, 400,000 priests, 600,000 nuns, 200,000 churches. Now think about that. That power. And for that to be involved in our movement, in our environmental movement, to terminate pollution. I'm very honored to be here because I'm next to an action hero. Now you're laughing because he doesn't look maybe like one, like you see in the movies with the muscles and with the guns and all that stuff. No. But the reason why I call him an action hero is because as soon as he became the Pope, he ordered the Vatican to put solar panels on top of the buildings. This will be one of the first states very soon to be carbon neutral.
Everyone in society, through non-governmental organizations and advocacy groups, must put pressure on governments to develop and implement more rigorous regulations, procedures, and controls. We inhabit the same planet, and we must care for it together.
Rhetoric around climate change that can be more polarizing, this shouldn't be used as a tool of division, right? This should be a place where we're coming together, which is classic Pope Leo. His whole deal is unity and peace.
This is Richard Delavan. If you told me 2 years ago, when we started Wicked Problems, that I'd spend most of the week in October 2025 hanging out with the Pope and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bill McKibben and former President of Ireland, Mayor Robinson, talking about climate issues, I would say you were absolutely out of your mind. But then again, if 20 years ago you told me that the Catholic Church was going to wind up being one of the main champions of climate science and climate justice, I would probably change my seat on the train to move away from you, because clearly you have some issues. When we started Wicked Problems, we quickly found that talking about climate solutions wasn't going to be sufficient if we just talked about the tech, if we just talked about finance, because everything depends on another thing, the context. It doesn't work without, the tech doesn't work without looking at the finance. It doesn't work without looking at the economics, which doesn't work without looking at the politics, which doesn't work without looking at the culture. And ultimately, how people see themselves in relationship to other people and to their place in nature, which sounds heavy, but you can actually predict a lot about how someone will come down on these issues if you actually get to know how they think those things work. Climate space is also a space with a lot of ambition, but it also has a lot of guilt and shame. There's a lot of the feels, and there are people who are very good at exploiting those feels to delay, to get people to want to change the channel, to just say it's all too much and I just can't possibly pay attention, or go the other way and go full apocalypse, end times stuff and say well, there's not really any point, because this is all coming to an end, and so therefore, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, which isn't necessarily helpful. And as we've talked about with people like Hannah E. Morris, people use that as well for their own purposes. And when I started Wicked Problems, it started really as an itch I needed to scratch, and I'm grateful to people who got something out of it. So we kept going and created more content, talking to more people smarter than me on these issues to figure out what all this meant and to share some of that with you. And I've been grateful that people have chosen to spend some time with it. But as part of that, one of the things I did is go back and read Laudato Si, this letter from the previous Pope, Francis, 10 years ago, that was published and talked about the need for people not just to talk about climate action because necessary because, we were going through planetary limits or abusing the ecosystem or, bringing gases out of balance in the atmosphere. or even because it would hurt other people that we'll never know or meet, or even, in theory, our kids and grandkids. That would also be a bad idea. It's not just a bad idea, continuing as we are. It's wrong. And I think that's the thing that Laudato Si re-injected into the discussion, as opposed to being a bland, somewhat airy, abstract conversation about, how much parts per million in the atmosphere of CO2 or greenhouse gas equivalents and all that good stuff, which is all essential, but doesn't have the same punch as being able to say, no, we have to do this because continuing to do what we were doing is wrong. It's hurting people. It's hurting the world around us. And this is something that's, I heard a lot in Rome last week, something that Pope Leo's taken a little bit in a different direction, the new Pope, Bob from Chicago, in looking at what that does to us as people who have to live with the decisions that we've made and the consequences of it and look at the hurt we've caused. Because the temptation to turn away from all that and fail to look at what we've done is extremely seductive. I mean, who doesn't want to not have to think about the things they did wrong? That's a natural thing. And spending all your time thinking about that, of course, is destructive as well. So the question is, what can you do about it? And as Pope Leo stresses, it's also self-defeating, because going through life like this is like never thinking about the consequences, thinking it's all about you, is corrupting. It makes you feel like nothing matters. Nothing is true. And you can kind of get off on daring people to contradict you when you're telling obvious, flamboyant lies.
So now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. We're getting rid of the falsely named renewables. By the way, they're a joke. They don't work. They're too expensive. They're not strong enough to fire up the plants that you need to make your country great. The wind doesn't blow. Those big windmills are so pathetic and so bad, so expensive to operate. Then they have to be rebuilt all the time, and they start to rust and rot. Most expensive energy ever conceived.
So when Bob from Chicago became Pope Leo XIV, a lot of people wondered whether or not he was going to come out as strong as his predecessor, Pope Francis, in standing up for calling out what was going wrong with the climate and the environment and what it was doing to people. And last week, at the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, this event, Raising Hope in Rome at the Vatican, or Castel Gandolfo, I should say, the Pope's summer gaff, a little bit south of Rome, where most of the action took place, we found out a little bit, and you heard a little bit of the clip at the front. So we're going to be doing a series of conversations, getting reactions to people, but also, the issues that kind of go along with that. But I do realize that, this is a context in talking about something, it's at the Vatican, for Pete's sake, that is, makes some people feel uncomfortable or some people less comfortable than others. And we're not pivoting this whole project to start talking about spirituality or religion or the Bible or whatever, but these things do matter. There's no way around it. And for at least two reasons. First, these big questions fundamentally shape how we see ourselves and our place in things and our relationships with each other, with other people and with nature. And as I said, you can predict how someone will come down on a lot of policy questions and a lot of technology questions based on what they think about those things. It's obvious in hindsight, but I didn't really think I'd be spending a lot of time having to think about this stuff, because it'll shape what they do, it'll shape what they think, it'll shape what they think is important, and what people are willing to fight for. So if you ignore that whole part of the story, you're ignoring a big part of what it means to be human. The second reason why I think it matters is that this is really all hands on deck. We can't really afford to decide like, well, I don't really like, I don't like talking about that stuff. And so therefore it makes me a little uncomfortable. Or because you had, previous experiences that made you think that like, this church stuff, that's not for me. Like whatever religion, the institution, it's not really for me. And I've been there. I've been there for a very long time, for reasons that people I know the reasons for. But the reality is that we have the allies we have, and we have to get together. We have to fight for each other. And so I'm excited to tell you that we're launching a sister project as part of the Wicked Problems. We're calling it Climate Pilgrim. So there's going to be a lot of crossover, but there are topics that you didn't sign up for if you're signed up for Wicked Problems, and I get that. So we're not going to just try to put that into your feed. We're going to have it there, and you can come check it out. You can check it out separately at climatepilgrim.com. And we are going to be, like I said, having crossover content. There are things that are relevant for both parts of that conversation, like the interviews I did in Rome with Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative head Kumi Naidu.
Apartheid, slavery, colonialism, and all of that was horrific. But actually the impacts of climate change and our fossil fuel dependency is much worse than all those struggles, all those injustices combined together.
And people calling for the church and the little city-state of Vatican City itself to back that fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty initiative and get off the sidelines, from climate scientist John Sweeney.
I would love to see, for example, faith groups going to COP30 and saying to their representatives, look, we want you to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. I would love the church to support things like that as well. And I think the urgency is quite clear.
Martin Hayes, a bishop from Ireland.
John Sweeney from the stage called for the church itself,
yes,
probably through the vehicle of the Vatican as a city, as a state, to become an actual fully bought-in signatory. Would you be in favor of the Vatican doing that?
Oh, I would, yes.
To Tuvalu's climate minister, Dr. Minat Talia.
Should the Vatican get behind it?
I think definitely the Vatican should provide the support that is needed by the treaty to endorse the treaty, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty.
And I also talked to lots of other people, surprise guests like former Irish Environment Minister and Green Party leader Eamon Ryan, who we knew back in the day.
Over those 30 years, I think we've evolved from seeing it as a scientific problem or technocratic or an economic problem to one which is more about our sense of ourselves, our sense of selves within creation, our sense of connection to nature.
To a lawyer working in Ukraine at the front line of a global struggle between fossil-fueled authoritarianism and what might come next, if we're lucky.
Our ultimate goal is to end global fossil fuel addiction that feeds Putin's war machine, but also other war vehicles around the world.
To an Anglican priest who also happens to be a London School of Economics trained financier and entrepreneur who looked at the world's stock of properties owned by the world's religious institutions and instead of just seeing nostalgia and a bit of decay, sees opportunities.
So in my view, this is not a left or right issue. This is a reality of where we're at with our cities and seeing that we need to develop for the needs that people see. In other words, yes, 1.5 degrees, yes, climate. But if that's not also dealing with homelessness on my street corner, we may lose people's attention.
I grew up Catholic, and I was confused about all the rules and rituals, and it was scary because it seemed like it was all very hard to follow and very easy to get it wrong all the time. So one day I asked a priest, what is sin? What is this thing that like you're in trouble if you do? And that seems complicated. And he said, look, it's really quite simple. Sin is a failure to love. And I thought about that for a long time, even when I wanted nothing to do with the church itself, because it didn't seem like they were doing a great job of practicing what they preached. And in the end, kind of the conclusion that we are all people and we all need to find ways to go forward and do better together. And so in trying to figure out what that means, at Climate Pilgrim, if you're interested, I'll be sharing my conversations with people from all faiths and from none. and as we try to figure some of that out and have some reflections and share them on, if you're interested. Not unconnected with what the Pope had to say last week, on Thursday, 9th of October, Leo put out another communication, Dilixite, in the Vatican lingo. That's a apostolic exhortation. It sits in a whatever classification thing. Anyway, but they announced it in the press room in the Vatican that I got to hang out last week. And by the way, can I just say, I'm not upset about the fact that I've got a cool press cred from the Pope for having gone to the Vatican. So, nice souvenir anyway. And during this release of this document yesterday, which is all about the Church's attitudes towards prioritization for the poor, Cardinal Czerny put the case well about how these things dovetail together.
Service is social love in concrete form, care for the poor and for our common home. Thus, the Church offers mercy to the world, promoting a civilization in which every person is recognized as the image of God. In Dilexite, Pope Leo joins Pope Francis in declaring there will be no peace as long as the poor and the planet are neglected and abused.
And I thought that was interesting in this, he talks about something that people in, different schools of economics talk about the same thing, but use different language. And the word the Church was using, the language the Church was using, is structures of sin. So when they're talking about structural changes that are needed, right, that it's not going to be enough to have a magic technology that's going to suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere, although that would be nice. The systems that help to make the situation are going to have to change, or otherwise we're never actually going to get beyond this bottleneck in human history. Because it really is, we're headed toward a bottleneck, and we're either going to make it out or we won't in one piece. But certainly it's not going to look like the past. And that's scary, but also there's an opportunity to make sure that whatever comes next is as good as it can be for people. And it's time to step up to that and cope with that. I wanted to start with a conversation with somebody who actually wasn't in Rome, but actually been watching Vatican communications, politics, etc. for years and years and years. She's Colleen Dully. She's amazing. She is based in New Orleans, but will be moving to Rome next year as the Vatican correspondent for America magazine. She also has a book that I read. I thought it was awesome, and we'll talk about that, which I think you should read, particularly if you're trying to figure out how to marry up what you do with some of the beliefs that you have. So let me know what you think in the comments. Come check out climatepilgrim.com if you want to know more. Wicked Problems at Earth and our other channels will occasionally cross over with those topics. So hopefully you get a lot of either or both. Here's Colleen Dully.
I'm delighted we could be joined by Colleen Dully, the Vatican correspondent for America magazine. Ironically, you're the Vatican correspondent, and I'm the one here in Rome. You're at home in New Orleans. But I could think of no one better to help us kind of chop up in the interpretation of how the Pope's remarks went down, as a veteran Vatican watcher and somebody who has seen the evolution of the Church on some of the issues that have been discussed at this conference. So I guess, first of all, thanks for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I should say as well, of course, you're the author of the fabulous book, Struck Down, Not Destroyed, Keeping Faith as a Vatican Reporter.
And shift my camera over to that.
There we go. And we were just talking in the green room about the fact that there's someone who's mentioned in the book who I ran into here at the conference, and I think she's still on the warpath for trying to get the GIS data made use of, and actually it came up quite a lot, the whole thing about building stock and how that could happen. But let's go back to the main topic we asked you on. So what was your impression from that distance of whether this event and Pope Leo's remarks made any kind of impact, and did any of it surprise you?
I don't know, the message that we got from the Pope was pretty typical of what we've heard from the Vatican for the last several years, and I would say that the response is also typical to what we've heard in response to what's come out of the Vatican for the last decade. Pope Francis came out with Laudato Si back in 2015, the responses were pretty predictable in that we had, a lot of people who were resistant to action on climate saying, well, the Pope should stay in his lane, he should stick to religion. And likewise, after this talk by the Pope, after his blessing of the water coming off of the big ice block, we heard exactly the same things from the same quarters, I would say. But, he also spent a lot of time in his comments talking about the legacy of Laudato Si and how it really did have such a big impact in interreligious circles around the world, obviously on the Paris Climate Accords, though he didn't mention those by name. And so I would say, I think that Leo's continued advocacy on this will probably have like a longer term, broader effect than just the media noise that we hear right now from certain quarters in the US.
Right. And I think there was a lot of, anticipation and certainly the build-up. Like there was a New York Times piece, in that previewing the remarks, and there were other people, the press corps that was here in this room. They've mostly left now, but it was hopping, here in the press room, and all for the both the post remarks. But I think the people have been briefed. I don't know if something was going to be said that didn't get said. It felt like there was maybe a lack
anticipation,
of certain bluntness. Yeah, the anticipation of more something more substantive. As you say, it's very similar and aligned with other statements that have come from the Vatican in the last couple of years. There's
very few policy proposal. Yeah.
And not again, interesting that it was in the press avail that he chose to take some questions that caused some that were more on topical issues,
right?
That got some pickup, as opposed to this very carefully, obviously worked on by staff, prepared remarks. So yeah, I guess amongst people that you talk to, who follow this stuff from within the tradition, whether they're in the institutions or not. Have you heard anything about what? Were they just like, okay, well, that's basically what we expected, and we'll move on now, or was there any kind of expectations that weren't met?
I don't know. I to be honest, did not hear a lot about like high expectations for anything groundbreaking in this, and so with it following mostly what we've heard from the Vatican in the past, I think it met expectations on that front. I think we had kind of Leo's particular twist on this, which is he called out the use of rhetoric around like climate change that can be more polarizing. He's like, no, this is about like, we need to get everyone on board. We need to convert hearts, and this shouldn't be used as a tool of division, right? Like this should be a place where we're coming together, which is classic Pope Leo. His whole deal is unity and peace.
My dear sisters and brothers, peace be with you. Before continuing with a few prepared remarks, I would like to thank the two speakers who preceded me. But I would like to add that if there is indeed an action hero with us this afternoon, it's all of you who are working together to make a difference.
He started the speech the same way he started his first speech from the balcony on the day of his election, by saying, "Peace be with you." But that didn't mean that he shied away from calling out some problematic behaviors or behaviors that he saw as problematic. I really was struck by when he talked about how some are using climate change and kind of the polarization around it, especially in the US, to blame the poor for, I believe exactly what he said was to blame the poor for the thing that they most are affected by, or the thing that affects them most.
Laudate Deum, published 2 years ago, noted that some have chosen to deride the increasingly evident signs of climate change, to ridicule those who speak of global warming, and even to blame the poor for the very thing that affects them the most.
Pope Francis often called this out. Laudato Si is equally about poverty and inequality as it is about protecting the environment. And he always had a very clear-eyed view of the fact that, the pollution of the world, the destruction of the environment, of our common home, most deeply affects the people who are living in the poorest areas of the world. And Francis espoused, the idea of richer nations paying a climate debt to poorer nations. We haven't heard anything like that from Leo yet. It's possible something like that could come out, especially we're expecting this first big document from him that is, as they say in Italian, a document a quattro mani, right? It's like a piece of music played with four hands, but written with four hands. Started under Francis, to be finished by Leo, that we're expecting probably sometime next week. But that deals with the theme of the poor, and I'm sure that it will have comments on the environment, on climate change in there. So yeah, I just some scattered thoughts, but I think he came out more strongly on that than maybe some people have expected. There's still this attitude towards Leo of, we're still seeing who this guy is going to be. And one thing that I've been hearing, especially on the more progressive wing of the church, is, kind of an expectation that he's going to be hesitant, that he's not going to be calling out injustices the way that Francis did. But I think that he's settling into the role and getting much more comfortable. I think we saw that in his comments to the press about immigration that made such a big stir in the U.S.
For the first time since celebrating his inaugural Mass, the American Pope from Chicago weighing in on U.S. politics. Pope Leo seeming to criticize the Trump administration over the president's immigration policies.
Someone who says that I'm against abortion, but I'm in agreement with the inhuman treatment of immigrants who are in the United States. I don't know if that's pro-life. So they're very complex issues. I don't know if anyone has all the truth on them, but I would ask first and foremost that there be greater respect for one another.
The rare remarks coming after his predecessor, Pope Francis, also slammed the president's crackdown on illegal immigration. Tonight, the White House pushing back on Pope Leo's comments.
You've been very open about your Catholic faith. How do you respond to that?
I would reject there is inhumane treatment of illegal immigrants in the United States under this administration.
But yeah, I think he's settling into it, and I think he's starting to show us who he is and what he prioritizes.
I suppose some people were wondering if he might make some more direct mention of, Amazonia in particular, given he wasn't in Peru, worked on the Synod of the Amazon and synodality. I guess you're much better placed to explain the concept. I had Bishop Martin Hayes try to explain it before as a and whether it's going to be an important part of how the church evolves on some of these things. It's an interesting moment in the conversations here. I guess, the people are still taking it in, I guess, about, what to think. So in terms of the other person, of course, and there was a funny exchange, I don't know if that got picked up or not, between him and Arnold Schwarzenegger at the very beginning. The only time the Pope went off script was after the Pope called him an action hero.
Yes.
For putting, for committing to put the Vatican City onto complete carbon neutral footing. Which I was kind of surprised wasn't already in place as a plan, but that was interesting.
I thought it was.
It was interesting. I think that it wasn't announced. I think it had been announced before, but I think Governor Schwarzenegger was characterizing it as being like the first thing you did when you came in basically was this.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Now I've in fact checked that. That doesn't sound like that.
It doesn't sound correct to me. I think that this predates Leo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So quick fact check. It's kind of half there. So the project obviously would have been underway for some time, but in July, Pope Leo did in fact the Vatican signed the agreement for a 1,000-acre solar array at a place just outside of Vatican City in Rome, where the Vatican currently has a bunch of antennas. Not a site without controversy, but is anyway kind of definitely there was a news event. So didn't mean to suggest that Arnold Schwarzenegger was making something up.
But I suppose it would be interesting if it happens on his watch. They power up the solar array and they get that stuff. But also, there's also been a lot of talk here about trying to call on him to endorse this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which probably has gotten no play in America.
No, of course not. There are spicier topics that everyone clicks on. Yeah.
Well, at the moment, the former Prime Minister of Greece was speaking here and actually made a nice joke comparing the ice that Leo blessed to ice in the streets of Chicago.
Blessing a genuine piece of ice. I say genuine because Somehow that piece of ice seemed as if it gave us a bit of a calmness, a composure, someone like meditating on the state of the world. Very different than another type of ice, which is terrorizing, which is demonizing, which is chasing and deporting.
Not very few comments like that on stage, but certainly a lot off stage.
Oh, certainly. It's all
happening here.
I've been traveling internationally, here and there, and traveling all around the States, especially for this book tour. And when I was just up in Canada, it was all anybody wanted to talk to me about, too. I mean, this is, preoccupying the world.
And actually, New Orleans is on the list, as I understand it. Are you guys? How are you feeling about that? Again, I'm not asking political opinion necessarily, but it's a bit freaky.
New Orleans is dealing with it the way that New Orleans deals with everything, which is with a big dose of humor and also some community organizing as well. But yeah, so I've been seeing just a lot of kind of memes on the internet about what they'll encounter once they get here.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they time it right, then I suppose the Guard could have a good time at Mardi Gras, and have some hurricanes handed to them on the street instead of water bottles.
Goodness.
But that's just me. So, I mean, the Schwarzenegger thing, though, was also interesting in and of itself, in that it was an interesting choice. For him to come, for him to be invited to come, and I suppose from a media perspective, it was. It seemed to work if their goal was
certainly
to get some cut through. In American media, what was it like sitting there at your end?
I think it was all of a sudden everybody was kind of surprised and delighted by the fact that here's Arnold Schwarzenegger like hugging Sister Alessandra Summerli. It's one of those moments, sort of like the conclave, when all the attention focuses on my little world of the Vatican all of a sudden. So I think that it did get some attention. I think it's a little bit unfortunate that the only comment that really went super viral was his Terminator line.
There's not one single human being that can manage and is able to terminate all the pollution. So therefore we have to work together. Every single one of these 1.4 billion Catholics can be a crusader for the environment and can help us terminate pollution. Terminate pollution. To terminate pollution. And there we beat them. We said, hasta la vista, baby. You see what I'm saying?
When he was like, we can't terminate all the pollution on our own. But no, it's, it brought some visibility to something that I think, again, has easily gone ignored, not just in the U.S. media because of everything that's going on here, but also in the Catholic press. And that's because it's the Jubilee year. October is a historically super busy month in the Vatican. If you think about it, all of the sessions of Vatican II all happen in October. The synods all happen in October. It's, one, a great time to be in Rome, but two, it's when everything gets scheduled for. Just this week, we have, the swearing in of the Swiss Guards, the Feast of St. Francis of Assisi, the Jubilee for Catechists was last weekend, the Jubilee for Migrants is this weekend, and that kind of overlaps with this environment conference happening because it's migrants and our common home. It's there's so much to keep track of right now, and so I think that the Catholic reporters are a little stretched thin. So you have Arnold Schwarzenegger show up, and it's like, oh, here's something that seems, kind of palatable, and we don't have to explain what the Jubilee is or the Synod is. And
Well, I imagine if I'm organizing some of those things that I'm probably a little bit annoyed that Schwarzenegger is stepping on my press. But anyway, that's how the game is played.
Exactly.
And the other thing that people have been speculating about, and again, I imagine it's not even, because again, so much else is going on in the United States and in Catholic circles, but there's been some scuttlebutt about whether or not Pope Leo would turn up at COP30 in Belém in Brazil. And if he did, of course, he would be the most senior American on site, which would be...
Yeah.
And I would just, putting your rank punditry hat on as a media observer, do you think that would have any kind of cut through? Would that make any difference in terms of American consumers of media or observers that, okay, the Pope decided to turn up? I guess, handicap whether it's worth it.
Yeah, I bet that he would speak in English, and that by doing that, it would cut through. He knows that when he makes comments in English, it's so much easier for U.S. media outlets to pick up a clip and run that in their broadcasts. And I think that that's why he chooses to speak in English at certain points. And so, it's not always that he's just responding to a question that's posed to him in English. He'll switch into English to say things that he believes are important. So I think that, if he were to go and speak in English, that it would certainly cut through some of the media noise. The real question is anybody going to heed it? Now, I don't know if you followed this, but maybe 5 years ago now, it might have been the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si, there were 2 students at Princeton, graduate students, who researched the impact of Laudato Si on Americans' political beliefs. Are you familiar with this?
I didn't see this. I must find it.
I interviewed them on my podcast when it came out, and basically what they were able to measure is that following Laudato Si, American Catholics did have a measurable shift in their opinions on climate change as a reality and as a moral issue that required action. And so I think we've seen that people will listen to popes on this. And my hope is that, Leo could maybe continue that direction. Maybe by appearing at COP30, but maybe by just speaking about this more and more and speaking about it in English when he can.
Pope Francis emphasized that the most effective solutions will not come from individual efforts alone, but above all, from major political decisions on the national and international levels. Everyone in society, through non-governmental organizations and advocacy groups, must put pressure on governments to develop and implement more rigorous regulations, procedures, and controls. Citizens need to take an active role in political decision-making at national, regional, and local levels. Only then will it be possible to mitigate the damage done to the environment.
He has a perfect foil, I suppose, in the vice president, whose name has also been dropped quite a lot around here this week.
That framing has been posed very often.
Yeah, maybe they can do a podcast together and work it all out.
My lord.
You could referee.
Yeah,
be on your show.
Please, if either of you are listening, come on my podcast.
There you go. And it's a fine podcast, which of course we'll link to it. You and Jerry O'Connell. It's brilliant. But in terms of, again, you're like you were saying, it's not really a little world. It's the whole world. It's just the microcosm of it being here in Rome. And it's your season. It's your big season. So thanks for taking the time to have this conversation.
Oh, sure.
But it's I have to just ask you a couple of questions about the book because it's such an extraordinary work. I mean, everyone I've spoken to here who has read it, and those who haven't, have it on their shelf or they're ready to go. But I'm like, you really need to crack that open and put that on the top of your pile. So, I mean, you're fairly young to have done a memoir, but I think it really worked. Tell me what inspired you to decide to actually to do it.
It's not like I, was like, oh, at my big age of 31, I'm ready to write a memoir. I consider myself still pretty early in my Vatican career, even though I've been on the beat for 8 years and, less dedicatedly so for a few more years on top of that. But I kind of got lucky in that an editor from Penguin Random House reached out to me. He was building his list of authors he wanted to work with because he was relatively new. And so he emailed me. He had read some of my articles and he said, hey, let's just chat and see if something could work out. Obviously, I went into that conversation very intent on making something work out. But as we started chatting, this idea kind of came out fully formed that I really hadn't thought about doing before. Personal writing makes me very uncomfortable. And it particularly did back then when we were having this conversation a few years ago. Obviously, I've gotten more used to it now. But we were talking about how, as a person who reports on the Vatican and who did... I really started my career during the 2018 wave of the sexual abuse crisis. I had a front row view of, just like some of the ugliest stuff in the Catholic Church. And the first thing people usually ask me when they find out about my job is like, so do you believe? Like, are you a Catholic? And somehow, yes, like I am still here, and I get a lot of like how questions about that. And so this is my effort to answer how I'm still here, how I've grappled with things, but also to kind of give people a deeper understanding of some of the issues.
And I think that's why I think it's such a remarkable book. I mean, I in no way have any career like yours, but when I was covering, and writing about abuse scandals of the previous kind of wave in the Spotlight era, when I was a journalist in Ireland, and writing about talking to survivors and talking to working on stories of people who had enabled people being moved around from parish to parish.
Yep.
And I got to say, it kept me away for a long time from going back. And
you're not the only one.
Recently, that's changed, but I found your book really, really inspiring about your own process about dealing with the reality of that, and you having had far more exposure than I ever did. It comes across so well in the book of how much you really had to struggle.
Yeah.
And argue with God in some cases about
yell at God. Talk about throwing the plates metaphorically.
Yes. No, I thought that was great.
Thanks.
And even your attempts to engage, and I loved the arc of it, with people who, again, some people like myself might dismissively online make a joke about tradcaths, but you made a good faith effort to really engage.
Try to understand.
Who didn't necessarily start in the same place that you did, and I thought it was lovely, and not twee, not saccharine.
Oh God,
not
no.
fake.
Yeah, please no. I'm allergic to all those things.
Well, and that's the thing. I think that's why it worked. It was one of these things. It's like watching someone on a tightrope and wonder, are they gonna make it across, or is it gonna make me go ooh? You did. So you landed. Good landing. So thank you for doing that.
I think that I'm still on the tightrope.
Well, I think if you're doing it right, that's probably correct.
That's I do feel that that's kind of where Catholics are meant to be, right? We gotta be grappling with this stuff. We have to be thinking critically about the institution that we embrace. It's And Jesus talks about a faith like a child, but I'm not there.
And I mean, one of the things you also talk about a little bit in the book is the role, the changing views, perhaps not fast enough, on the role of women in the church, and in particular, I mean, like, interestingly, at the press conference this week, Schwarzenegger rattled off a bunch of stats about the church. 1.4 billion, 200,000 churches, 400,000 priests, and someone obviously must have mentioned to him, because in his remarks here, the following day, he added 600,000 nuns, which had been missing in the first part. So someone obviously gave him a little bit of a talking to.
Yeah, right.
Say, like, you're kind of missing an important constituency here.
Yeah, sure.
And and obviously there's been a lot of conversations here, and of course we're speaking on the day that the Church of England has appointed its first female archbishop.
Yeah,
so
Archbishop of Canterbury.
Of Canterbury, of course, yes. Sorry, in the Church of England. But in the end, that's a story that's going to roll.
I long for that same hope for all those around the world caught up in war, for those living in extreme poverty, for those on the front line of the ever-worsening climate crisis, for our Palestinian Christian brothers and sisters, for all peoples of the Middle East, for the people of Ukraine, Russia, Sudan, Myanmar, and the DRC. May God end the horrors of war, comfort those who mourn, and bring hope to those living in despair.
Do you think we will eventually see the kind of change that would maybe not result in a female pope, but certainly changes in leadership that I think you note in the book? There's no rule that says you couldn't have a female be cardinal.
Yeah, that's right. It would take a small tweak to canon law, maybe. I think it depends, what you're asking about, right? The ordination question is obviously a big one, and within that, there's the question of, ordination to the diaconate, which seems more a possibility than ordination to the priesthood, which has been pretty thoroughly shut down. But I think that the progress we're likely to continue seeing, and I think Leo staked out his position on this quite clearly, at least as soon as he made one of his first curia appointments of a woman, is this progress that Francis started on appointing women to higher and higher ranking positions in the Vatican. So, for a long time, women could be in kind of the lower, like middle management positions. And gradually it got to be greater and greater. And now we do have a woman who is a prefect of a Vatican dicastery, so is heading a Vatican office. That's really significant. And Leo, I guess, in the conclave, the pre-conclave meetings where the cardinals are kind of hashing out the issues, it really was on the role of women that there ended up being this kind of big falling out that ended up having a reaction and deciding the course of the conclave. So one of the cardinals stood up and gave this talk about how Francis had been wrong to appoint women to these high-ranking positions. And because that cardinal was seen as an ally of one of the frontrunners, and because the pushback to it was so swift, it really tanked that man's candidacy. So this was clearly a hot topic in the pre-conclave meetings. Leo came out as the unity candidate, but at the same time staked out with his first appointment of a woman to a Roman Curia high-ranking position that he was going to continue down the path of Francis. I think we're now seeing, especially just in the last month or so, we're seeing Leo continue to say he's going to be a Francis man, Yeah, it seems like he's coming out stronger on immigration. He's talking a lot about unity. I think he's going to be really careful not to make big decisions that make people feel alienated. I think he's probably going to extend some olive branches to groups that Pope Francis didn't. But it seems like on some of these key issues, Leo is fully intending to follow the Francis model.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it for today. I know you've got other things on your plate, so thank you so much, Colleen Dully, Vatican reporter for America Magazine, host of the Inside the Vatican podcast, and author of Struck Down, Not Destroyed, an excellent book that anybody struggling with how to think about what they're doing in the world and how to reconcile it with their other values and beliefs it's an absolutely essential read. So thank you so much for coming on Wicked Problems, Colleen.
Thank you, and thanks for all the kind words about the book. I really appreciate it.
They're all sincerely meant.
Screaming at the gods about the bad we've done. Merle said Mama tried, but the prison still won. Your transgressions are mine as well. Anger grows in my bones if you could not tell. But I'll find comfort in company. Lord, forgive us, my boys and me. We're having an all-night revival. Some will call the women and some will steal the Bible. For to save my survival. Baptize me in a bottle of bean for Johnny on the vinyl.
Well, thanks for listening and watching Wicked Problems, now also Climate Pilgrim. We'll be going back and forth, so thanks for tuning in. One last thing before we go. You may have seen, as part of that event last week, Pope Leo putting his hand on a chunk of Greenland glacier that had been brought over to Rome to symbolize, the as it was melting quickly, the melting of polar ice, etc., but also, what that represented in a whole theology around, creation, around the elements, and how that is, not, some hippy-dippy weird pagan stuff, although there was plenty of that kind of reaction from around different corners of the internet and on TV.
Did you see that video of Pope Leo at the Climate Change Summit? I guess it's like a couple of minutes ago, blessing a now it wouldn't be the first time that priests bless water all the time, holy water. It's in every church. Yeah. But he went a step further and he blessed a block of ice in a sign towards fighting climate change. Do I have that right?
Now, Richo, I thought maybe the Pope might be onto something. We could fly the Pope down to the Antarctic or the Arctic even, and he could bless all the ice and solve global warming. We wouldn't have to have windmills or solar panels or renewables or any of this other rubbish. As Michael said, we could just get back to being energy rich.
But I'll let you in on a little secret. After the event, or at the end of the event, the ice that had melted and had been blessed by the Pope, my wife refers to it as Pope juice, was given out. And so right here, a little bit of that glacier in this bottle, which, I don't know, is just a thing that's going to be around. To get sort of serious for a minute, I mean, the reactions to the Laudato Si 10 years ago and the idea that the Pope or the Church would be getting involved in climate is, of course, something that a lot of people who have an interest in trying to deny or delay climate action anyway are saying, well, the Pope shouldn't be involved in that, or, it's silly what they're doing. Or, if they're more sort of serious, then, they'll explain why you don't really have to pay as much attention to that when the Pope says it, because reasons like this guy.
That's not necessarily something you have to give religious submission of intellect and will to. Or on the other hand, what Francis says about statements of fact. So you don't have to say I agree. I have to agree with what Pope Francis says about his specific interpretation of the scientific facts about climate change. So neither of those two things. It really is just like the underlying moral teaching.
But I suppose that's one of the reasons that, in these other conversations that I'll be sharing, I mean, one of the questions I wanted to ask a church leader, I asked of Bishop Martin Hayes from Ireland, and asked him, how seriously, should particular Catholics in public life, in particular, if they say that they're super traditional Catholics or Orthodox Catholics, have to take seriously what the Pope said and says about climate.
You're just mentioning the pushback on some of these issues. Obviously, it's a global phenomenon. And nowhere is that more prevalent, I think, than in certainly the U.S., where there's a very prominent Catholic who has a very prominent role as the Vice President of the United States. I think it was you, but someone from the stage was talking about the fact that this is, Catholic social teaching is Laudato Si. This isn't like a nice to have, get extra fries with your burger thing.
Laudato Si is not just a document about, as Alistair said, about the environment. It's actually part of our social teaching. It's part of our theology. It recommends a framework for working into the future. It's important for all of humanity at this time.
This is this is the core, what the magisterium is saying, that Catholics should at least pay some deference to. It's a completely cheeky question, but if you were talking to Vice President Vance, would you remind him of that?
I would. I'd love to. Now, one of the things I am aware of as well with regard to the man you named, the Vice President Vance, is that it seems he's a recent convert. That's right. And and he has a particular, and I would say a particular niche version of Catholicism. I'll leave it at that. And I would love to it. Now, I believe that the Vatican, and my understanding is the Vatican is staying close to him, because it's better to be standing close and be talking to them rather than to come out publicly and say, look, you are the wrong version of Catholicism. Yeah. So that's the diplomatic way of dealing with things.
And again, so I have to reassure my wife, it's not going off on some religious kind of, off the deep end with that stuff. But it is something that I found a really moving experience, something that I found was great to talk to a lot of people who shared a sense of urgency, but also a sense of fun, a sense of wanting to say, yeah, I mean, this is the hand that we've been dealt. By history, we're the ones here in the front line. We have to be the ones who fight like hell, and if we're going to do that, we got to bring some spirit to it that's a little less, kind of fire and brimstone all the time, and maybe a little more like the inflatable folks who are turning up at protests in Portland against the armed thugs that the U.S. government's now sending into American cities.
Froggy jumped all over the stage that day. Froggy jumped all over the stage that day.
So more on that a different day. But come check out the other episodes at climateprogram.com. On all the other channels, we'll put some of them, of course, in the main feed in Wicked Problems. Conversations with, Minister Maina Talia from Tuvalu, with Kumi Naidoo, the president of the Global Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, with Bishop Martin Hayes from Ireland, with Eamon Ryan, former Irish Environment Minister, with Graham Sinclair, that Anglican priest I mentioned, and with Svitlana, the Ukrainian lawyer who was talking to us about her effort to tying together, some of these issues of faith with the issue of fossil fuels and how that's fueling conflicts around the world, including in her native Ukraine. And she, we get a little bit hopeful about, what the future might hold and what that might teach others about an energy system that is both resilient and isn't fueling some of that kind of stuff. So tune in for that. Thanks.
We said, hasta la vista, baby. You see what I'm saying?